Ladies and gentlemen, there is a quiet war that unfolds not on battlefields, but in glances, silences, and shadows. It is a war without declaration, one that rarely makes noise, yet leaves wounds far deeper than most spoken conflicts. You have perhaps felt it, the sudden change in someone's eyes, the strange coldness in a room that once felt warm, or the unexplained distance that grows between you and another. The silent war of hatred that arrives unannounced, and often without cause you can easily name. When people begin to hate you without warning or explanation, it is tempting to believe you have done something wrong, or that some hidden mistake lies at the root of their sudden contempt. But the truth runs deeper and darker than that, rooted not in your actions but in the unseen labyrinth of their own unresolved pain, insecurity, and internal conflict. For in many cases the hatred they feel has little to do with what you are, and everything to do with what you represent in their inner world. A reflection they did not consent to face, a mirror they did not ask to be held up to their soul, and yet your mere presence has become that mirror, forcing them to confront aspects of themselves they have spent years avoiding, pushing into the shadows qualities like courage, self-love, authenticity, and inner peace, traits they admire but have long felt disconnected from, and so rather than face that disconnection, rather than admit they have neglected or suppressed these parts of themselves, they project their discomfort onto you, crafting narratives, rationalizations, and quiet judgments in order to justify the feelings that stir within them whenever you walk into the room or speak your truth or shine in your own natural way. Because what you have, be it confidence, clarity, compassion, or creativity, can act as a trigger, a wound reopening, a reminder of what they could not or did not choose to develop, and thus your growth becomes their burden, your light becomes their glare, your authenticity becomes a threat to their carefully maintained identity, and in the face of such discomfort, hatred becomes the easiest path, because to hate you means they don't have to hate themselves. To blame you means they don't have to accept their own responsibility for where they are or what they've become, and this hatred often arrives without warning, passive at first, subtle and slow, revealed in half-hearted smiles, delayed replies, or the absence of enthusiasm where it once lived. But it grows in silence like a storm beneath still water, until one day you realize they are no longer on your side, no longer cheering, no longer present in any real way. And while it confuses you, while it may even hurt, it is vital to see the truth in this dynamic, to understand that their hatred is a wound speaking, not a judgment of your worth, not a verdict on your path, but a sign of an inner fracture they have not mended, and in this sense their hatred is not personal, even if it feels intensely so, because the root of it lives within them, not within you, and to internalize their projection is to take on a ghost that is not yours, to carry a burden that was never meant for your back. And so the work, the real challenge, is to recognize the source of the hatred without letting it reshape you, to stand firm in the clarity of your intentions and the truth of your journey, without needing to explain, defend, or diminish yourself in response. For when people turn against you suddenly, when they speak ill of you in quiet corners or withdraw their energy with no clear cause, it is often not an ending but a revelation, an unveiling of the limitations they have chosen, the path they refuse to walk, and you, in growing or shining or healing, simply made those limitations visible. And while you may grieve the connection, you must not grieve yourself, because your light did not create their darkness. It only revealed it, and in that revelation, you are not the villain but the spark, not the problem but the unintentional catalyst of a truth they were not yet ready to face. There is something unsettling to many people when they are in the presence of someone who is fully authentic, someone who speaks and moves with a quiet conviction that is not loud or boastful but rooted in an inner alignment they have cultivated through solitude, struggle, and deep introspection. And when such a person walks into a space, they unknowingly disturb the invisible order others have built their lives upon. Because most people do not live authentically, they live according to roles, masks, and expectations crafted by family, culture, religion, or trauma, and these roles serve as shields, as defense mechanisms to survive in environments that once demanded suppression, silence, or approval, seeking as a means of safety, so when someone appears who has broken free of these patterns, who is no longer playing the old games of validation or conformity, their presence becomes disruptive not because they are trying to disturb the peace, but because their mere existence exposes that there is a deeper truth available, one that others have not yet had the courage or strength to access, and this can be deeply threatening to those who are still clinging to their scripts, because to admit your truth was never your own is to unravel the entire narrative you've lived by. It is to stand face to face with the possibility that you have spent years becoming a version of yourself that isn't real, and this is not a realization most people welcome, and so rather than embark on the painful journey inward, rather than question the persona they have invested in, they redirect their unease outward, labeling the authentic one as arrogant, rebellious, too intense, or too different, finding subtle ways to diminish or discredit them not because they truly believe these things, but because they need to protect their illusion from collapse. And the deeper irony is that these same people may have once praised your authenticity when it was still mild, still digestible, still something that didn't challenge their comfort zone too directly. But the moment your truth grows too loud, too clear, too unwilling to play along, that is when the tides turn, and you become difficult, ungrateful, or even dangerous to their sense of stability, not because you have changed in a harmful way, but because you have evolved past the point where their version of you still fits. And this evolution confronts them with the inner truth that they too have a choice, that they too can break their patterns, but that choice comes with pain, and since most people fear the cost of authenticity, they instead develop resentment toward those who chose to pay that cost. And this resentment does not always show up as open hostility. Often it is silent, masked in distance, in vague disapproval, in half-support, in backhanded compliments, in the quiet disappearance of enthusiasm, and it can leave you wondering what went wrong, what shifted, why someone who once seemed close now feels cold, and the answer lies in the subtle power of truth. It does not scream, it does not demand, but it disrupts. It interrupts illusions without trying, and this interruption can be felt as a violation by those who are not ready to meet themselves honestly, so they hate not the truth itself, but the one who carries it, because that person unknowingly becomes a symbol of the freedom they have denied, the voice they have silenced, and the self they have betrayed in order to belong. And so authenticity, though beautiful and liberating, is also dangerous to the world of illusions, not because it causes harm, but because it cannot be controlled, it cannot be managed, and it exposes the false without lifting a single finger, making those who cling to the false feel deeply unsafe, and in that space of discomfort, hatred is often born, not through logic but through psychological reflex, a defense against awakening, a desperate grip on the familiar, and in that moment, the one who lives in truth becomes the one who must be rejected in order for the illusion to remain. Intact human relationships are far more fragile and conditional than most people realize, because beneath the surface of every connection lies a web of unspoken agreements, silent contracts forged not through conscious dialogue, but through shared patterns, mutual fears, and subconscious expectations, and these agreements often go unnoticed until one person begins to grow, to change, to step outside the familiar frame they once inhabited. And suddenly the relationship feels strained or disconnected without explanation, because what has happened is not a betrayal or a personal offense but a quiet breach of an invisible pact, and these pacts sound like this. We will both stay the same so neither of us has to face discomfort. We will both avoid our wounds so we don't have to speak of pain. We will both play small so that no one has to feel inadequate. And when you begin to break out of that structure by healing yourself, elevating your thinking, changing your habits, or speaking in a more honest voice, the silent alarm is triggered, not by intention but by energetic tension. And this shift is rarely welcomed by those still bound by the contract, because your transformation reflects their stagnation, your movement highlights their stuckness, and what once felt like mutual understanding now feels like misalignment. And though they may not know how to name it or articulate what's changed, they feel it in their bones, and this feeling often translates into confusion, defensiveness, or passive hostility, because your growth has unknowingly challenged their comfort zone, threatened the foundation of the unspoken agreement, and people do not take kindly to such threats when they have not yet chosen growth for themselves. So rather than confront their own discomfort or explore their own inner conflicts, they project blame outward. They rewrite the story so that you become the one who changed, the one who became distant, arrogant, too ambitious, too different, too much, when in truth, all that happened is you stopped living inside the terms of a contract you never signed with awareness, and now that you've evolved, your presence itself becomes a contradiction to the version of you they held in their mind, and that contradiction breeds cognitive dissonance, an emotional split where they cannot reconcile who you were with who you are now. And instead of bridging that gap with understanding, they pull away, they criticize, they create narratives that protect their sense of self from the painful possibility that they too must change if the relationship is to survive. But change is frightening because it means facing long, buried truths, admitting suppressed desires, shedding identities that have become familiar even if they no longer serve. And most people would rather hold on to the known suffering than venture into the unknown healing. So when you begin to embody that healing, to walk in alignment, to speak from clarity, you disrupt the emotional economy of the relationship, you shift the dynamic without asking for permission, and in doing so, you cause a kind of psychological earthquake that some people are not equipped to withstand, not because you did something wrong, but because you did something right for yourself, and those who are not yet willing to do the same may respond with resentment, distance, or even subtle forms of sabotage, not out of cruelty but out of fear, fear that your change demands they reconsider their choices, and if they are not ready to face that reckoning, they may instead choose the path of quiet rejection, a gradual turning away masked as emotional coldness or strategic withdrawal. And this silent unraveling hurts because it's not loud or violent, it's not declared or explained, it just fades, disappears, becomes an absence where connection used to live, and if you are not careful, you may internalize this loss as your fault, when in truth, it is simply a reflection of how fragile unspoken contracts are when they are built on shared avoidance rather than shared evolution. And once you've outgrown the terms, the contract dissolves, revealing whether the bond was rooted in truth or in a mutual agreement to never outgrow the past. There are moments in life when the very qualities that make you whole, the traits you have worked hard to develop through years of suffering, discipline, and self-inquiry, suddenly become the reasons why others turn against you. And this turning is not always loud or direct but quiet, often hidden behind politeness, social distance, or vague disapproval, and you are left wondering why someone would dislike you for being kind, calm, focused, or authentic. But the truth is not found in surface-level explanations. It lies deep in the psychology of human emotion where projection, envy, and self-abandonment reside, and what often happens is that your light, your confidence, peace, creativity, or independence, acts as a mirror to others, not reflecting what they are, but what they are not yet ready to become, and instead of responding with admiration or curiosity, they respond with resistance, because your light shines too clearly on their darkness. And most people are not yet willing to face that darkness, so they reject the source of the reflection instead of questioning what it reveals, and in doing so, they begin to resent you not for any harm you have done, but for being a living reminder of a version of themselves they lost or never allowed to exist. And that resentment grows quietly. It feeds on comparison, on shame, on self-judgment disguised as external blame, until it morphs into hatred or contempt. And this emotion is not rational or justified but deeply human, because in your presence they feel the dissonance between who they are and who they could be, and instead of seeking to bridge that gap, they try to silence it by making you the problem, and this is especially true when qualities you embody are those they once desired but buried. Your emotional clarity may remind them of how they suppress their feelings. Your ability to speak honestly may confront the years they spent people-pleasing. Your spiritual depth may challenge the shallowness of their current priorities. And so you become an unwanted symbol of truth in a world where most people are running from it. And the tragedy of this dynamic is that you may feel punished for doing the very thing you were meant to do, for being the person you were called to become, and the confusion this creates can be profound because you did not attack, you did not manipulate, you simply existed in your fullness, and yet that fullness triggered something unspoken in others that turned into resistance. But to take their projection personally is to misunderstand the source of the wound, because at its root it is not about you, it is about what you awaken in them, and that awakening is not always welcomed. It is often met with fear, with denial, with bitterness, especially if the person has not developed the inner resilience to face their own limitations without shame, and so in their perception, you become the antagonist in a story that was never really about you, and this can leave you feeling isolated, misunderstood, even blamed for things that were never yours to carry. But if you look closer, if you see beyond the surface, you will realize that every attack, every cold glance, every whispered judgment is an expression of inner conflict, a desperate attempt to silence the voice inside them that whispers you could be more, you could live differently, you could stop pretending, and until they are ready to listen to that voice with compassion rather than fear, they will reject those who remind them it exists. And this rejection is not a curse, but a consequence of living truthfully in a world that often rewards conformity. So you must choose whether to dim your light to remain accepted, or to continue being a silent invitation for others to rise, knowing that some will hate you not because you are wrong, but because you are right too soon for them to bear. When someone begins to hate you without reason, when you feel the subtle shift in energy, the pullback in affection, or the silence where warmth once lived, it is natural to want to respond in kind, to mirror their distance with your own, to protect yourself by retreating into defensiveness or anger. But this response, though understandable, is often a trap disguised as strength, because the moment you allow their bitterness to shape your behavior, the moment you let their wounded perception define your self-worth or dictate your emotional state, you hand over the keys to your inner world to someone who is not qualified to hold them, and in doing so, you become reactive rather than rooted, pulled into a drama that does not belong to you, a silent war that was never about your truth, but about their discomfort with it. And the deeper challenge here is not to fight back, but to stay centered, to remain anchored in the quiet knowing of who you are even as the noise around you tries to distort that clarity. Because the more you live from truth, the more you will awaken both admiration and resistance. And while admiration feeds your sense of belonging, resistance tests your resilience, revealing whether your sense of identity is truly internal or still tied to external approval. And when others project their unresolved pain onto you, the instinct to defend yourself can feel overwhelming. But sometimes silence is not surrender, sometimes it is sovereignty, the refusal to be dragged into a battlefield that thrives on your participation. And when you do not react, when you do not match their coldness or bitterness, you rob the war of its fuel. You become the calm in the storm, not out of passivity but out of mastery, and this mastery is not about ego or moral superiority. It is about understanding that the most powerful response to hatred is often no response at all, not because you are weak, but because you are aware of the futility of engaging with what is rooted in someone else's unresolved wounds. And this awareness does not mean you condone harm or tolerate mistreatment. It means you choose discernment over destruction, clarity over chaos, inner alignment over external validation. And in that space, you learn to hold compassion without attachment, to see the suffering behind the hatred without internalizing it, to recognize that what feels like an attack is often a cry for healing that the other person does not yet know how to voice. And when you see this clearly, you begin to understand that your job is not to be understood by everyone, but to be faithful to your own unfolding, because those who are meant to walk beside you will not be threatened by your light. They will be inspired by it, and those who are not ready may fall away, not because they are bad people, but because your truth requires a level of honesty they are not yet able to give to themselves, and in this falling away, there is no need for bitterness, no need to chase or explain, only the quiet courage to continue becoming, to keep showing up with integrity, to remain open, hearted even when others close theirs. And the beauty of this path is that in time you become unshakable, not because life becomes easy, but because your peace no longer depends on whether others love you, approve of you, or stay with you. And in that independence, in that emotional self-reliance, you find a deeper kind of freedom, one that cannot be taken by gossip, by rejection, by silence, because it was never built on them to begin with. And so when the silent war appears again, when people turn cold or strange without cause, you no longer fear it. You welcome it as a signal, a threshold, an invitation to go even deeper into your own truth without apology, without resistance, without losing the softness that made you human in the first place. So when people suddenly begin to hate you, smile, not out of spite, but out of understanding. You have touched a chord in them that they have not yet had the courage to hear. That is not your burden, that is their invitation to grow. You must continue on your path, silent or not, loved or not, for there is a deeper allegiance you must honor, the one to your own unfolding. Thank you.